So we look at the next section of King Lear for AQA English Literature Paper 1, the tragedy paper, and we're looking now at Act 2, Scene 2. So, plot moving on a bit. Ken has arrived at Gloucester's castle. At the same time, Oswald arrives and they get into an argument. And we're going to look at the middle of this scene from line 67 to 130. And this is where Kent has made such a noise, or Oswald really has made such a noise about Kent attacking him, that Cornwall and Regan and Edmund actually as well have come out to see what was going on. And what they see, according to Oswald, they sort of believe really what Oswald says, and they think that Kent is in the wrong, and they quickly learn that Kent is a messenger from Lear, and they've already read the letters from Goneril about Lear, so they kind of, you might say, to justify their behaviour, they associate Kent's behaviour with these rowdy knights that Goneril's warned Regan about. More negatively, they've decided, like Goneril, that they're going to gang up against Lear, and so they're not going to trust any of his followers. So, locating the passage, we're now back to the main plot, having spent scene 1 of this act on the subplot. We're following on from Kent having been sent with a message, but we know that Oswald's message has already got there, and that Oswald has kind of followed here, having already delivered his message to Regan and Cornwall. So it's too late, really, if Kent tries to say anything to Regan and Cornwall anyhow. And what we see here is a continuation of Kent's character, as we've seen him stand up to Lear, be quite fierce there. Then we've seen him show incredible loyalty and also arguing and fighting with Oswald, both in Act 1 and the beginning of this act. But what we see in this sequence is that sort of anger becomes less controlled, and he seems to think that anger has a license, as he'll begin by saying, really. And he says some foolish things, and it's perhaps that he models his behaviour on his master, Lear, who thinks that being angry is, a good way to be, really. That's a good way to deal with issues. So let's have a look at the particular sequence. We're going to begin then when Cornwall says to Kent, okay, why are you angry? Because Kent said, I'm really angry with this Oswald. And his answer is, again, another example of the way the language of this play is so rich in chaos and fury and bitterness and really all sorts of unpleasantness. And here he throws a lot of insults at Oswald, the smiling rogue. He calls him, he talks about the lords, their lords rebel. He talks about every gale and vary of their masters, knowing naught like dogs, but following a plague upon your epileptic visage. So he's saying that he's right, this is what Oswald's like. He does anything that Goneril tells him to do. He calls him a rat. It says, like rats. Talks about the bring oil to fire, which obviously, again, an image there of sort of passion and fury and just chaotic, explosive stuff, really. And it's a sort of outpouring of venom and anger, which Cornwall perhaps rightly responds to by saying, well, are you mad? What's the matter with you? And of course that word mad is one of our big themes in the play. And here, madness is equated with just lack of self-control, really, of giving vent to your fury. And again, it, as I said before, it really seems as though Kent thinks this is the way you should behave, because this is how Lear behaves when he doesn't get what he wants. Gloucester's there too, and he tries to kind of smooth things up and say, well, okay, well, how did you fall out? What happened? But Kent doesn't give a straight answer. I don't know why. It's sort of something that you might want to think about. Why is Kent so difficult here? I think because he knows that Regan and Cornwall and Gonwall, obviously too, off stage, are very much against his master, and he's sort of getting his retaliation in first, if you want. He's fighting against what he thinks is going to be their lack of sympathy for him. But he's genuinely also disgusted by Oswald, who has tried to sort of portray himself as bravely fighting against Kent when in fact he was just cowardly and shouted for help. So he just says, no countries hold more antipathy than I for this such a name. Nobody could have such hatred as I have for this person. And Cornwall, he kind of senses frustration in his response. Well, why? What is it that you're angry about him? And his response again, Kent seems to be the sort of deliberately not answering the question or being sort of sulkily uncooperative. His countenance, his face likes me not. I don't like his face very much. That's not really an answer, is it? And it's not clear why he doesn't give a better answer, like, well, he's a sneak. But I suppose because he knows that anything he says is likely to be against Goneril to some extent, and that Regan and Cornwall aren't likely to be very sympathetic to that. Anything he says that's in favour of Lear probably isn't going to go down very well. But it's a little bit of an echo of Cordelia's refusal to give a straight answer when everything is debased and when any sensible answer is likely to be rejected or misunderstood, and where lies are the only things that seem to have any value. To say nothing is the only other answer, and he virtually says nothing. Cornwall sort of plays along with this and jokes and says, well, perhaps my face doesn't appeal to you either, nor Regan's. And then Kent's response is comical, really. And again, there's big questions. Why does he push it so far? Why does he actually insult Cornwall? Essentially, probably because he knows that Cornwall and Regan are not on his side. They're against him. They're against Lear. He saw what happened in that first scene, and he saw through that in a way that Lear didn't. That they were cynically manipulating the situation. So he says, it's my occupation to be plain, which is Kent's motto, if you like. So if you ever answering a question on Kent himself in the second part of the paper, that's a quotation you'd want to use, isn't it? It's his job to be plain, to be straightforward, to be blunt, to say what he feels. But then he says, well, I've seen better short faces than any that I see in front of me now. I don't like any of your faces very much. Which is funny in its own way, but also rather foolish and obviously very disrespectful. And we're kind of not quite sure why he dares to be so disrespectful at this point. But it seems that that's his thing. He's determined that he's going to wind Cornwall and Regan up a little bit, test them almost. Now, Cornwall's in charge, although obviously it's Regan who has been given the land officially, but as Regan's husband in a patriarchal society, which was Elizabethan and Jacobean culture, and certainly Shakespeare portrays this pre-history as being very patriarchal, Cornwall has almost more authority than Regan. And he describes the situation as if talking to other people, really, maybe even almost as if talking to the audience. Here I am praising him for his bluntness, and now he's being saucily rough. He can't flatter. He's going to be honest and speak the truth. Cornwall's got a point. You know, these people who say, well, I tell it like it is. I don't suffer fools gladly, which is often an excuse for just being blatantly rude. There's a sort of self-indulgence there and self-righteousness about those people who say, well, I'm just saying what I think. I'm just telling you what I feel. But, you know, sometimes it's better not to say those things. You know, sometimes things are better left unsaid, as indeed Cordelia seemed to suggest at the start of the play. And Cornwall's got a point. You know, sometimes it's better not to say things. It doesn't gain you anything to say, I don't like your face, to anyone, really. So Kent sort of pushes it even further. When you're in an argument, you know, you start to become unreasonable, and that's certainly what Kent's learnt from Lear. So now he does a sort of mocking voice, which Lear does at times too, when he was pretending, saying, oh, who who is it that can tell me who that I am? You know, sort of putting on an act. And here Kent puts on an act. Oh, okay, well, I'll speak in a very long-winded, a bit like Regan spoke and Goneril spoke to Lear in the first scene. Sir, in good sooth and sincere verity, under the allowance of your great aspect, whose influence, like the wreath of raining flowers on flickering Phoebus's front. So a bit of poetry, really. So a lot of wordy nonsense. And Conwell's like, what do you want about? And he says, well, you want me to go out of my dialect. I'm going to speak how you want. I'm not a flatterer, but you don't want me to be plain. So I'll speak like this, should I? And Cornwall doesn't really engage with that sort of flippancy and says, well, what's the offence you gave him? And he turns to Oswald. In other words, on stage, you have to have that moment there where Cornwall just looks at him and goes, I can't be bothered with you. I'm not getting anywhere here. I'll try another route. I'll talk to Oswald. And so Kent is rather like Lear in the first scene. You know, his anger has destroyed any possibility of his success in the scene. He's just handed over power to Oswald by behaving unreasonably. Cornwall's every right to think this is a fool. This is a you know, an unhelpful, unpleasant fellow, and so surely Oswald is right to be angry with him and fight him. And Oswald picks up on that quickly. He's learnt a little bit from Goneril. He's no Edmund. He's got none of that fluency of rapid skill of making the most of a situation, but he knows enough here to say, oh, well, I didn't give him any offence. And then he mentions, knowing again full well the sort of things that would be in Goneril's letter, knowing that to speak against Lear is likely to be a good thing for Cornwall and Regan. So he says, oh, well, you know, his master hit me. The king hit me upon some misconstruction, which it wasn't, obviously. And then he tripped me up, which is kind of the truth, but also not quite the truth. Because it wasn't on a misconstruction. He deliberately wound Lear up because Goneril had asked him to. And then by doing that, he got the praises of the king. So it makes Kent out to be the flattering sort of a creep, if you like, but which is exactly what Oswald is. So again, lots of irony throughout the play. Oswald is the one who creeps around Goneril doing everything she asks. But he sort of says, well, that's what Kent's like. Now, Kent, again, sort of doesn't reply in any way that makes him more likely to win this argument. And just seems to say, oh, well, you know, all these rogues and fools, they always make out that, you know, that they are better and stronger than their betters. So, you know, Ajax, great Greek warrior, these rogues and cowards will make out that somebody greater than themselves is a fool when it's them that are rogues and cowards. But that's again sort of almost equating himself with Ajax, the great Greek hero, and therefore doesn't make him sound very humble. And so fetch forth the stocks. Forceful language, stubborn ancient knave, irreverent braggart, we'll teach you. Now that's a key phrase in the play, we'll teach you. Lots of people need to learn things in this play. King Lear in particular, and Gloucester as well. But Kent says, sir, I'm too old to learn. And there's an element of that he doesn't really change throughout the play. He keeps on that one simple line of loyalty. I will stick to what I believe in. What I believe in is that I must do whatever I can to support my master, King Lear. But that doesn't help him. And you could argue that Kent, like Lear, does have some things to learn, really, particularly how to interact with people more successfully. It's not to say to lie like Regan and Goneril did in the first scene, but to just not wind people up when it's unnecessary. And again, he tries to put this idea, the king I've sent, you know, I've been sent on his behalf, and so he's not going to be very pleased when you put this messenger in the stocks. That does not cut any water, cut any ice with Cornwall. He says, "Fetch forth the stocks. He shall sit there till noon." And where we'll stop is just with Regan's reply: "Till noon, till night, my lord, and all night too," which is very typical of Regan, if you remember, throughout the play, always trying to go one step further than those around her. It seems to be as sort of middle child. That's her. That's almost her. Her personality. And so when Goneril, the first scene, says how much she loves Lear, Regan says, "Oh yes, but even more so." But later on, it becomes things like this cruelty. "Oh, keep putting him in till midday. Oh, I'm sorry, till night. That's not long enough. Keep him there overnight in the stocks." So, the cruelty, the sort of viciousness, the sadism really there from Regan, just wanting to see Kent suffer because she knows he's one of Lear's followers. So this is the outcome of what happened in the first scene, that people like Kent now have no power whatsoever and are going to be mistreated. But also there's lots of layers here. As with Lear, we never quite, in the early part of the play, side with Lear because of his fury and his sort of patriarchal self-righteousness. And here we're not entirely on Kent's side either, because I don't think he behaves in a way that we admire. We think you could handle this better and get a better result. And you allow someone like Oswald to get away with it here by behaving stupidly, really, by falling into the trap of the cynical characters, which is what Gloucester and Edgar and Lear have all done. And here Kent does too. So the gullibility and the foolishness of goodness seems still to be the message of the play, and that evil is going to thrive. And Cornwall starts to emerge here as well as a harsh and uncompromising leader. And we see that later on, that he has seen his chance to take charge of things. And it's been told to us a couple of times that Albany and Cornwall don't get along. And that will become more obvious as the play goes on, that Albany remains quite reasonable and on the good side and a bit disquieted by what's happening, whereas Cornwall relishes in his opportunity to be powerful and to push people around and to get what he wants. And so Kent is going to be in the stocks. And at the end of this scene, which we're not going to look at here, but there's a great soliloquy from Kent on his own, just again a little bit like where we saw Lear at the end of Act 1. Here Kent sitting on his own at night in the stocks, lonely, isolated, and he says, "Fortune, turn thy wheel," that things have to turn round. He's at a low ebb now, he's at the bottom of fortune. Can he rise up again? Well, things get worse before they get better.